The crystal chandelier cast fractured light across 130 silent faces. The clinking of silver forks against fine porcelain abruptly stopped. My father stood at the head of the long banquet table, adjusting his silk tie with a sharp scoff. "It's cute that you wear a tailored suit just to hand out basic schedules," he announced. His voice boomed over the soft jazz playing from the corner speakers. "But let's be honest, Elena. You are just a glorified assistant here. Maybe if you worked a little harder, you wouldn't have to fetch water for my actual important guests. Like, subscribe and comment where you are watching from today." I did not raise my voice. I simply placed my glass down, the ice clinking softly against the rim. Slowly, I pulled a matte black master keycard from my blazer. I tapped it against the security scanner on the heavy mahogany doors directly behind me. A sharp electronic beep echoed loudly. As the massive double doors swung open to reveal the sprawling executive suite, every single guest stared at the polished brass plaque bolted to the wall. It read, "Elena Vance, founder and sole owner." My father's arrogant smirk completely vanished. To understand how we got here. 3 weeks earlier, the morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my private office. The Obsidian Estate was not just an event venue. It was an empire I built from absolute scratch. Spanning 40 acres of prime coastal property, it catered exclusively to high-net-worth clients who demanded absolute perfection. I sat at my wide desk, reviewing the quarterly financial reports. The room was perfectly quiet. I preferred it that way. In my line of work, silence was a crucial tool. It allowed you to observe before reacting. Discipline was the foundation of everything I did. A soft knock interrupted my deep focus. Marcus, my head of security, stepped into the room. He was a towering man with a strict military background, yet he always spoke to me with absolute deference. "Ms. Vance, we have an issue with the grand ballroom," Marcus said, keeping his hands professionally clasped behind his back. "A vendor is refusing to use the designated service elevator. They are demanding access through the main guest lobby." "Who is the vendor?" I asked, not looking up from my digital tablet. "Silverline Catering. They claim their specific contract allows it." I set my tablet down gently. "Cancel their contract, pay the required penalty fee immediately, call our secondary backup caterer." Marcus did not blink or hesitate. "Understood, ma'am. I will handle it." That was exactly how I ran my highly successful business. Swift, quiet, and without unnecessary argument. My authority was absolute because I never had to shout to enforce it. If my dedicated staff respected me, my own family was a completely different story. To them, I was just the disorganized girl who managed schedules and fetched coffee for executives. They believed I worked as a low-level event coordinator. I never bothered to correct them. Why did I stay calm and let them believe a massive lie? Because words meant absolutely nothing without concrete proof. If I told them I owned a multi-million-dollar luxury property, they would have instantly demanded free VIP access. They would have paraded my hard-earned success around as their own personal achievement. Keeping them completely in the dark was my form of personal discipline. It fiercely protected my daily peace. Suddenly, my private cell phone buzzed on the polished mahogany desk. The glowing caller ID flashed my father's name, Arthur Vance. I took a slow, deep breath. Answering his unpredictable calls always required heavy mental armor. "Hello, Dad," I answered, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "Elena, listen to me closely." His harsh voice barked through the tiny speaker, entirely bypassing any standard greeting. "Your mother and I have a major family announcement. We are celebrating our 30th wedding anniversary next month." "Congratulations," I said evenly. "Are you planning a small private dinner?" He laughed. It was a cruel, dismissive sound that grated on my nerves. "A small dinner? Do not be ridiculous. We are inviting 130 of our absolute closest associates. Highly important people, Elena. Wealthy investors, senior executives. Your older brother is even flying in from overseas." Of course. He mentioned my older brother, Julian. He was merely a mid-level regional manager at a mediocre tech firm, but my parents treated him like modern royalty. "That sounds like quite the large event," I replied cautiously. "It will be massive," my father continued, his arrogant tone turning incredibly sharp. Which is exactly why we are officially booking the Obsidian estate. I froze. The expensive metal pen in my hand completely stopped moving over the paper. The Obsidian estate was my heavily guarded property. It was notoriously difficult to book, often requiring an intense 6-month waiting list and strict background checks. How did you secure a reservation there? I asked carefully. Julian pulled some heavy strings, he bragged loudly. He knows an elite broker who knows the senior booking manager. It cost an absolute fortune, but your brilliant brother insists on only the best for us. I knew for a proven fact Julian did no such thing. My standard booking manager simply approved a basic application that randomly came through the public web portal, but my father was absolutely certain of Julian's imaginary influence. Why was he so blindly convinced? Because in his traditional mind, only a man like Julian was capable of navigating high society elite circles. I was entirely invisible to his pride. Here is the real reason why I am calling you, my father said, lowering his voice into a demanding, commanding register. Since you work there as a tiny assistant, I strongly need you to make yourself useful for once. Useful how? I asked, narrowing my eyes. You are going to ensure we get the premium imported beverage package completely for free. You work in the main building, Elena. Sneak into the back office, talk to whoever your actual boss is, and simply get it done. Do not embarrass us in front of Julian and our wealthy guests. I leaned back slowly in my premium leather chair. The sheer, blinding audacity of his ridiculous request hung heavy in the quiet air of my secure office. He directly wanted me to risk my fictional job just to save him a few measly $1,000, all while gladly giving all the praise and credit to my brother. I cannot simply alter a finalized contract, Dad, I stated calmly, maintaining my strict composure. The owner is notoriously strict about billing. Then you are just as pathetic and useless as I always thought, he snapped viciously. Your brother bravely secures the grand venue, and you cannot even secure some simple champagne. Just make sure you are working a long shift that night. We will clearly need someone to run basic errands for our table. The line abruptly went dead. He hung up without saying a single goodbye. I slowly placed the phone down on the smooth desk. A very strange, cold sense of pure calm washed over my entire body. He eagerly wanted me to be a servant at his grand party. He wanted to boldly parade his fake wealth and my brother's supposed high-level connections in front of 130 elite guests. He was confidently walking right into my personal house. He just did not realize it yet. I firmly pressed the glowing intercom button on my desk. Marcus, I called out clearly. Yes, Ms. Vance? My parents are unexpectedly hosting a large event here in 3 exact weeks, I calmly instructed. They are currently under the false impression that I am very junior staff. Ensure the entire operations team addresses me only by my first name that evening. Absolutely no management titles. Are you completely certain, ma'am? Marcus asked, a rare hint of confusion creeping into his usually stoic, disciplined voice. Absolutely, I replied softly, staring out the window at my sprawling empire. Let them confidently see exactly what they desperately want to see. The 3 weeks leading up to the grand anniversary gala felt like an elaborate chess match played entirely in silence. I spent my days managing the complex logistics of the Obsidian estate, signing off on 6-figure corporate retreats and dealing with high-profile clients who demanded absolute discretion. But every evening, my phone would light up with a new, frantic demand from my mother. Elena, did you make sure the floral arrangements are pure white orchids? She asked during one particularly exhausting call. Julian said the venue usually uses standard roses, and we simply cannot have standard anything. It must look expensive. The standard packages are quite premium, I replied carefully, staring at the intricate spreadsheet detailing her event's floral budget. The irony was thick. I had personally hand-selected the rare white orchids for the estate's premium tier 2 years ago. But I will ensure the notes say orchids. Good. And make sure your uniform is at least presentable, she added, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. We have highly influential people coming. Julian's regional director will be there. We do not want them thinking you are just a scruffy laborer. The casual cruelty of her words barely stung anymore. My parents had spent a lifetime building a shrine to my brother's mediocre achievements while actively tearing down my own. When I first started my company, struggling to secure a small business loan, they told me it was a foolish pipe dream. They actively discouraged me, telling their friends I was lost and wasting time. When the estate finally became a massive success, I made a conscious choice. I simply stopped talking about work. Discipline meant knowing when to stay quiet. I let them construct their own narrative. It was easier to be the family disappointment than to constantly defend my ambition against their relentless skepticism. 2 days before the event, the final walkthrough was scheduled. My parents arrived at the estate's grand iron gates in a rented luxury sedan, attempting to look the part of wealthy elites. I watched them from the tinted window of my second-floor office. Julian was with them, wearing a flashy designer suit that likely cost more than his monthly salary. I took the private elevator down to the lobby, swapping my tailored blazer for a simple, unbranded black cardigan over my dress shirt. I grabbed a generic clipboard from the concierge desk just as they walked through the towering glass doors. "Elena," Julian called out, his voice echoing loudly in the serene, marble-floored lobby. He smirked, looking me up and down. "Look at you, holding down the fort. Do you get a discount on coffee here?" "Hello, Julian," I said evenly. "Welcome to the Obsidian Estate." My father didn't even bother to greet me properly. He was too busy inspecting the massive crystal chandelier hanging from the vaulted ceiling. "Impressive," he muttered. "Julian, you really outdid yourself finding this place. The broker you used must have incredible connections to get us in here." "Oh, you know me, Dad," Julian lied smoothly, slipping his hands into his pockets. "I know how to talk to the right people. It's all about networking." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep my expression perfectly blank. Julian had absolutely zero connections here. He had simply filled out the online inquiry form just like any other generic client. But my father beamed with pure pride, clapping Julian on the shoulder. "Let's see the main ballroom," my mother demanded, waving her hand vaguely in my direction. "Show us the way, Elena. Try to keep up." I led them down the long, art-lined corridor. My staff, fully briefed on the situation, played along perfectly. The head concierge simply nodded at me, offering a polite, "Good afternoon, Elena," rather than her usual formal greeting. Marcus, my head of security, walked past us and merely tipped his head respectfully. "They seem to have you well trained," my father remarked dryly, noticing the brief interactions. "At least you are finally learning some proper work ethic. Being an assistant isn't glamorous, but it builds character." I pushed open the heavy oak doors to the grand ballroom. The space was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the crashing ocean waves. The tables were already being set with fine silver and the exact white orchids my mother had aggressively demanded. "Oh, it is perfect," my mother gasped, her eyes wide with greedy delight. She immediately turned to Julian. "You did this, darling. You gave us the perfect anniversary." Julian puffed out his chest. "Nothing but the best for my family." "Elena," my father said sharply, snapping his fingers to get my attention. It was a demeaning gesture that immediately spiked my heart rate, but I kept my face entirely impassive. "I need you to speak to the actual manager about the valet situation. I want my car parked directly in front of the main fountain, a priority spot. The fountain spaces are strictly reserved for emergency vehicles and the estate owner," I explained softly, gripping the edges of my generic clipboard. "It is a firm fire safety protocol." "Nonsense," my father scoffed loudly, waving a hand in disgust. "Rules are for people who can't afford to bypass them. Go find someone with actual authority and tell them Julian Vance's party requires that space. If you can't even manage a simple parking request, why do you even work here?" The sheer arrogance of his demand hung in the air. He was standing inside the very empire I built, actively demanding I break my own strict safety protocols to stroke his fragile ego. "I will see what can be done," I replied carefully, refusing to argue. "See that you do," he sneered, turning his back on me to admire the ocean view. "And ensure you are working the floor on the night of the party. We will need someone reliable to fetch our drinks. I do not trust these random waiters to get it right." They left an hour later, completely satisfied with their grand illusion. They believed Julian was a powerful networking genius. They believed they were high society elites commanding a luxury venue. And they firmly believed I was nothing more than an incompetent servant entirely at their mercy. As their rented sedan drove away, Marcus stepped silently up beside me in the grand lobby. "Miss Vance," he said quietly, his voice a low rumble, "are we actually allowing them to park by the main fountain?" I handed the generic clipboard back to the concierge desk. A slow, steady calm washed over me. The stakes were set. The stage was perfectly arranged. "No, Marcus," I replied, smoothing down my collar. "They will park in the standard guest lot, just like everyone else. Let them complain. The real show hasn't even started yet." The night of the 130-guest anniversary gala arrived with a crackling energy. The Obsidian estate was glowing, floodlights illuminated the grand exterior, and the towering fountain in the circular driveway roared to life. High society elites, wealthy investors, and corporate directors stepped out of luxury vehicles, immediately met by my sharply dressed valet team. I stood in the shadows of the mezzanine, watching the flawless execution of my staff. I was dressed in a simple, sharp black suit. No name tag, no flashy jewelry, just clean lines and quiet authority. Below me, the ballroom was a sea of shimmering gowns and tailored tuxedos. The soft jazz quartet I had personally selected played elegantly in the corner. My parents were holding court near the grand ice sculpture, soaking in the admiration of their peers. Julian stood right beside them, laughing loudly and accepting countless congratulations for securing such an exclusive venue. I took a deep breath, smoothing my jacket. It was time to join the floor. Discipline required me to play the part perfectly until the very end. I descended the grand sweeping staircase and immediately began circulating the room. I wasn't serving drinks, but I kept a watchful eye on the service flow, nodding subtly to waiters to clear empty glasses or adjust lighting. It was the standard oversight I performed at any major event, but to my family it looked exactly like menial labor. It didn't take long for my mother to spot me. She cut through a group of distinguished guests and grabbed my arm tightly. "Elena, what are you doing just standing there?" she hissed, her voice low but laced with pure venom. "Julian's regional director is at table 4, and his water glass is half empty. Go fix it immediately before you embarrass us." "The service staff rotates every 15 minutes, I replied calmly, gently removing my arm from her tight grip. "They will be there shortly." "I don't care about their little schedule." My father suddenly appeared behind her, holding a crystal glass of aged scotch. His face was flushed with false pride and expensive liquor. "Do your job. We are paying a fortune to your bosses for this place." He purposely raised his voice just enough to catch the attention of a nearby circle of VIP guests. They turned to look at us, their expressions curious. My father puffed out his chest, clearly deciding this was the perfect moment to assert his dominance in front of his wealthy peers. "Is there a problem, Arthur?" one of the guests, a senior banking executive, asked with a polite smile. "No problem at all, Richard," my father boomed, gesturing toward me dismissively with his scotch glass. "This is just my daughter, Elena. She works here as a junior coordinator. We try to support her little endeavors, you know? Not everyone can have Julian's corporate drive." The banking executive offered a tight, patronizing smile. "Ah, yes, the hospitality industry is quaint, good for young people to learn how to take orders." I felt a sharp flash of heat rise in my chest. The blatant disrespect was not just aimed at me, but at the very empire I had built with my bare hands. I kept my face entirely blank, maintaining strict eye contact with my father. "It is a very demanding industry," I said evenly, my voice steady over the hum of the party. "It requires intense discipline and absolute precision." My father scoffed loudly, a harsh sound that cut through the jazz music. "Precision? You hand out schedules and fetch water, Elena. Please do not try to make it sound like you run a Fortune 500 company." "Julian here." He grabbed my brother's shoulder, pulling him into the circle. "Julian negotiates million-dollar contracts. He actually has a title." Julian smirked, swirling his champagne. "Come on, Dad. Take it easy on her. Someone has to make sure the napkins are folded correctly." A ripple of condescending laughter moved through the small crowd of elites. They were actively mocking me in the center of my own ballroom. I glanced at the nearest service station. Marcus, my head of security, was standing near the kitchen doors. His jaw was clenched tight, his eyes locked on my father's arrogant face. He was waiting for my signal to intervene, but I gave him a microscopic shake of my head. Not yet. Your salary probably barely covers rent, my mother added, her voice dripping with fake sympathy for the benefit of the guests. We are just so glad Julian could help you out by bringing our business here. Maybe your manager will finally give you a small raise. The escalation was systematic and entirely predictable. First, false pride in their own status. Second, patronizing my small life. Third, outright belittling my ambition to elevate Julian. I manage just fine, I replied softly, the quiet calm washing over me once again. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the far side of the ballroom. The jazz quartet stuttered to a halt. The entire room went dead silent as 130 guests turned to look. Near the floor-to-ceiling windows, one of the massive, custom-built floral archways had completely collapsed, taking a service table down with it. Shattered glass and white orchids were scattered across the polished marble floor. A waiter stood frozen in horror, water pooling rapidly around his shoes. Panic immediately rippled through the crowd. This was exactly the kind of disaster that ruined high society events. My father's face turned bright red with absolute fury. He turned on me instantly, pointing a thick finger directly at my chest. "Look at this absolute disaster!" he roared, completely dropping any pretense of wealthy elegance. "This is exactly why you will never succeed, Elena. Your team is completely incompetent. Go fetch the real boss right now and tell them I demand a massive refund for this embarrassment." I looked at the shattered glass. I looked at the panicked guests. Then I looked directly into my father's furious, arrogant eyes. The shattered glass covered the marble floor like ice. 130 faces were staring directly at me, wide-eyed and waiting for an explosive reaction. The soft hum of the massive industrial air conditioning unit was the only sound left in the grand ballroom. My father stood inches from me, his face twisted in pure, demanding rage. "Did you not hear me, Elena?" he snapped, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Go fetch the real boss right now, or are you too terrified of getting fired to do your job properly?" Julian crossed his arms, leaning back with a smug, patronizing smirk. "Come on, Elena. Don't make us look bad in front of all these important people. Just go get the manager." I did not flinch. I slowly brushed an invisible piece of lint off my sharp black blazer. I looked at the terrified waiter standing in the puddle of water, then I looked back at my father. "There is no need to fetch anyone," I said. My voice was dangerously calm, carrying clearly through the silent room. I raised my right hand slightly, not breaking eye contact with my family. Across the room, Marcus immediately stepped forward from the shadows. He did not run or panic. He moved with the practiced military precision of a man who answered only to absolute authority. "Marcus," I called out, my tone shifting instantly from polite daughter to commanding executive. "Deploy the Delta team to clear the glass. Move the guests back exactly 10 feet. Bring out the secondary archway from Storage Unit 3. "Yes, ma'am. Right away," Marcus replied, stopping a few feet from me and bowing his head in strict deference. He immediately spoke into his earpiece, and within seconds, a team of 6 staff members moved seamlessly to handle the disaster. My father blinked hard, momentarily confused by the sudden shift in power. "What do you think you are doing?" he demanded, stepping closer. "You don't give orders here. You fetch water." "Actually, Arthur," I said quietly, using his first name for the first time in my life, "I give all the orders here." A low murmur rippled through the crowd of elite guests, but my father simply barked out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "You? Don't be ridiculous. Stop playing games and go get your manager." "Follow me," I instructed firmly, turning my back on him without waiting for an answer. I walked straight through the center of the ballroom, parting the crowd of millionaires and corporate directors effortlessly. My parents and Julian hesitated, but the sheer confusion on their faces forced them to follow closely behind me. We approached the grand hallway just outside the main doors, right where the crystal chandelier cast fractured light across their furious, bewildered expressions. We stopped in front of the massive mahogany double doors of the executive suite. The area was strictly off-limits to everyone, guarded by a heavy biometric lock. "What is this nonsense, Elena?" my mother hissed, glancing nervously at the guests watching from the ballroom entrance. "You are embarrassing us." "You wanted to speak to the real boss," I replied evenly. "I am showing you exactly who you are dealing with." I reached into my blazer and pulled out a matte black master keycard. It was solid metal, completely unmarked except for a small engraved crest of the Obsidian estate. I tapped it against the security scanner. A sharp electronic beep echoed loudly in the silent hallway. Then, I pressed my thumb firmly onto the glowing biometric pad. The heavy locking mechanism clicked violently, unlocking a door that no low-level employee could ever access. I pushed the heavy mahogany doors open, revealing a sprawling, luxurious office overlooking the entire coastal property. But I didn't step inside. I simply pointed to the polished brass plaque bolted firmly to the wall right beside the handle. My father stared at it. His mouth fell slightly open. It read, "Elena Vance, founder and sole owner." "No," Julian whispered, stepping forward and staring at the heavy brass letters like they were an illusion. That can't be right. You're an assistant. You said you were a coordinator." "I never said that," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "You assumed it, and I never bothered to correct you because I knew exactly how you would react." I gestured to the sprawling estate behind me. "This entire property is mine. The contracts, the staff, the premium packages you bragged about, I own all of it. The six-figure bill you paid for this room, it went directly into my personal accounts." My mother put a trembling hand over her mouth, her eyes darting between my simple suit and the massive office. "Elena, how?" "Discipline," I answered sharply. "While you were busy worshipping Julian's basic management title, I was building an empire in complete silence." The silence in the hallway was absolute. The soft jazz from the ballroom felt entirely disconnected from the heavy reality crashing down on them. My father's arrogant smirk was completely gone, replaced by a deep, humiliating realization that he had just aggressively mocked the most powerful person in the room. "You let Julian take the credit for booking this place," my father choked out, his voice suddenly weak and thin. "You let him look like a powerful broker." "I let him look exactly like what he is," I corrected calmly. "A man who fills out public web forms and lies about his connections." Julian's face flushed dark red with pure shame. Several guests near the door were actively whispering now, the truth spreading through the 130 elites like wildfire. The dynamic had completely flipped. The illusion they had built to show off their wealth was shattered, not by anger, but by quiet, undeniable proof. "Rank isn't the point," I said softly, looking my father directly in the eyes. "Respect is, and since you cannot show me any in my own house, you are fortunate I am not charging you double." The heavy double doors clicked shut behind me, the biometric lock sealing with a sharp finality. The hallway was thick with the kind of absolute, stunning silence that followed a bomb going off. My father stood perfectly still, his glass of scotch shaking slightly in his right hand. Back at their grand anniversary table, the entire dynamic had visibly shattered. The wealthy elites who had chuckled at my expense just 10 minutes prior were now staring at me with a mix of awe and blatant calculation. They recognized power when they saw it, and the sheer scale of the Obsidian estate meant I held far more of it than anyone else in the room. My mother carefully sat down, smoothing her expensive gown with trembling hands. "Elena," she started, her voice unnaturally high and thin. "Why didn't you just tell us? We would have celebrated this. We would have been so proud." I pulled out a chair directly opposite my father and sat down slowly, resting my hands on the pristine white tablecloth. "Would you?" I asked quietly. My voice was calm, entirely devoid of the anger they expected. "Or would you have immediately demanded VIP access to impress your friends? Would you have claimed my success as your own, just like Julian did tonight?" Julian flinched visibly. He stared down at his half-empty champagne glass, his flashy designer suit suddenly looking very cheap under the crystal chandelier. "I didn't exactly lie," he muttered weakly, trying to salvage a tiny shred of his ego. "I did fill out the booking form. And then you claimed you used an elite broker to secure it. I replied evenly, not raising my voice. You lied to make yourself look important. And you, Dad, you used that lie as a weapon to belittle my life in front of 130 people. My father finally set his scotch glass down. The sharp clink against the table echoed loudly. For the first time in my entire life, he looked at me and didn't see a failure. He saw a rival who had entirely outplayed him. I was only trying to motivate you, he said, his voice dropping into a defensive, gruff register. You were always so quiet, so unbothered. How was I supposed to know you were building a real business? A father worries, Elena. I almost laughed at the pathetic attempt to reframe his cruelty as parental concern. It was a classic deflection tactic, designed to protect his fragile pride. Motivation does not require public humiliation, I stated firmly, leaning forward slightly. The jazz quartet had resumed playing, but the music felt miles away. Rank isn't the point. A title on a brass plaque doesn't make me better than anyone here. Respect is the point, and the lack of it tonight was deafening. An awkward, tense silence settled over our small corner of the ballroom. For the rest of the evening, my parents barely spoke to their elite guests. The grand illusion of their superiority was entirely broken. They ate their premium catering quietly, casting nervous glances at the staff members they had previously treated like invisible servants. 3 days later, my private cell phone buzzed loudly on my polished mahogany desk. It was my mother. Hello, I answered, my tone perfectly neutral, returning to the strict discipline that had built my empire. Elena, darling, she said softly. Her voice lacked the sharp edge of demanding arrogance she usually carried. Your father and I would like to take you to lunch today, just the three of us, somewhere neutral. I agreed, choosing a quiet, upscale bistro downtown, entirely away from the massive shadow of my estate. When I arrived, they were already seated in a private booth. My father looked tired. The false bravado he wore at the party had completely vanished, leaving behind an aging man wrestling with his own ego. We ordered you an iced tea, my mother offered nervously, pushing a tall glass across the table. I remember you liked that when you were younger. Thank you, I said simply, taking a seat and keeping my posture perfectly straight. My father cleared his throat loudly. He refused to look me directly in the eyes at first, instead focusing heavily on the salt shaker near his plate. We owe you an apology, he finally grumbled. It sounded incredibly painful for him to admit. The way I spoke to you at the venue, it was unacceptable. I was angry about the broken floral arch, and I lashed out at the nearest target. You lashed out at me long before the arch broke, I corrected him calmly. You mocked my clothes. You belittled my supposed salary. You actively tried to embarrass me in front of wealthy executives. He winced, finally meeting my gaze. His eyes held a flicker of genuine regret, buried beneath layers of stubborn pride. I was terrified, he admitted, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. We spent our entire lives trying to look successful to those people. Julian was our golden ticket to that world. When I saw you working there, I felt exposed, like you were ruining the image. The raw honesty surprised me. It was the first time he had ever admitted weakness. My life is not a prop for your social image, I replied softly, showing a flash of emotional intelligence instead of cold anger. I built my success in silence because I knew my noise would only compete with Julian's ego. I don't need your approval to run my company, but if you want to be part of my life, the disrespect ends permanently. Right here. Right now. My mother reached across the table, her hand trembling slightly as she touched my sleeve. We understand, Elena. We really do. We want to start over. I looked at her, then at my father's defeated posture. The real question hung heavy in the quiet air of the bistro. Did they actually respect me as their daughter, or were they just terrified of losing access to a multi-million-dollar CEO? 2 months after the grand anniversary gala, the towering iron gates of the Obsidian estate remained closed. It was a rare Tuesday evening off, and the massive property was bathed in the soft glow of twilight. I stood by the grand fountain in the circular driveway, dressed in comfortable jeans and a simple sweater, no sharp blazer, no corporate armor. A familiar rented sedan pulled up slowly, parking precisely in the designated visitor lot, entirely away from the VIP spaces my father had aggressively demanded weeks earlier. My parents stepped out. Julian was not with them. This was the second dinner, held on completely neutral ground. No 130 wealthy guests to impress, no flashy corporate titles to hide behind. It was just an intimate family gathering I had cautiously agreed to host in my private residence on the estate grounds. "Elena!" my father called out, his voice noticeably quieter than the booming, arrogant tone he usually carried. He walked up the stone pathway, holding a simple bottle of wine instead of an expensive imported scotch. "Good evening," I replied evenly, leading them inside my home. The atmosphere was tense but distinctly different. The sharp edges of their usual condescension had been completely filed down by the humiliating reality check at the gala. As I poured the wine in my quiet kitchen, I watched my mother carefully admiring the subtle, elegant architecture of the house. She wasn't calculating its monetary value loudly, she was simply observing. "The gardens are beautiful," she said softly, accepting a glass. "You must have spent years designing them." "I did," I answered, leaning against the marble counter. "Discipline takes time. It requires patience to grow something lasting." My father stood awkwardly near the living room entrance. The man who had loudly mocked my basic schedule uniform in front of elite millionaires now looked incredibly small in my private sanctuary. He cleared his throat, setting his glass down with a soft clink. "Elena, I have spent the last 2 months thinking about what you said at the bistro," he began, his voice rough but steady. "About using your life as a prop for my social image." I stayed perfectly silent, holding his gaze. "I was a fool," he admitted firmly, his shoulders dropping. "I was so deeply obsessed with looking wealthy to people who don't actually care about me that I actively destroyed my relationship with the only person who built something real. I treated you like a servant in your own empire because my own ego couldn't handle the truth." The raw, unpolished sincerity of his words struck a chord. He wasn't making excuses. He wasn't blaming a broken floral arch or his desire to motivate me. He was finally owning his disrespect. "I am incredibly sorry, Elena," he continued, taking a slow step forward. "Not just for the gala, but for all the years I spent tearing down your ambition while you built this massive company in absolute silence. You are far stronger than I ever was." I set my wine glass down gently. The deep, heavy resentment I had carried for years began to loosen its grip. True power wasn't about seeking loud revenge or rubbing my millions in their faces. It was about standing firmly in my truth until they were forced to recognize it. "Thank you," I said softly, the quiet room amplifying the weight of my simple response. "I appreciate you saying that." For the rest of the evening, the dinner proceeded without a single mention of Julian's flashy title or their high society friends. When I spoke about my upcoming projects, they actually listened. They asked genuine questions about my staff and my logistics. They showed their newfound respect through their actions, entirely abandoning the patronizing tone they had used my whole life. As I walked them back to their car under the starlight, my father stopped by the grand fountain. He looked up at the massive silhouette of the Obsidian estate, then turned back to me with a small, proud smile. "You built an incredible legacy here, Elena," he said quietly. "I'm just grateful you're finally letting us see it." I watched their sedan drive away, the red taillights fading into the darkness. The air was cool and peaceful. I didn't need their validation to run my empire, but knowing I had commanded their respect simply by remaining disciplined and unbothered was the greatest victory of all. Success doesn't need to scream for attention. It just needs to be undeniable when the doors finally open. If this story reminded you of someone, or if you know what it feels like to be underestimated by the people who should support you most, share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Be sure to like the video, subscribe, and follow along for more stories of quiet strength just like this one. Have you ever been underestimated before people knew your true story? What did you do to prove them wrong? Let me know in the comments below.